Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is FBC Radio Live. It's Friday, August 31st, 2023, and hey, we're wrapping up the weekend. This is the last show of August, and September means it is officially football season. So, John, I'm it's funny because it depends on when you ask Joe Montana the question. That it kind of depends on what his answer is, and the question that I'm referring to is the greatest quarterback of all time, a title he formerly owned for a decent amount of time, but he once again kind of flip flopped, and it's kind of funny, kind of sad. The sadness is the bitterness, in my opinion, but it's funny because it's like, again, depending on what day you ask him, is what his answer is going to be. And this time he kind of meandered around basically saying Dan Marino was the greatest quarterback of all time because of the standard, oh, well, if he would have played in this era, blah, 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 blah. So, John, I remember once upon a time, Joe Montana said Tom Brady was unequivocally the greatest quarterback of all time. And like I said, it's funny to me to see him continue to flip-flop on this subject.
Yeah, I think a lot of the older guys, the all-time greats, will do this from time to time. Maybe they forget what they said before, or a lot of times what the athletes do is they want to pump up their contemporaries because in doing so, they pump up themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this obviously like Charles Barkley. Oh, no, Michael Jordan's the greatest player ever because I couldn't beat him, but that makes me seem better because I couldn't beat the greatest player ever. It happens quite a bit. Scottie Pippen's actually taken a different approach by saying LeBron's the greatest player ever. Well, I think he's trying to pump himself up by saying, don't forget about me contributing to Michael Jordan.
There's a very complicated relationship between those two right now. So let's just say it goes beyond just basketball history.
True.
So
There's a lot there. That's a whole other podcast we could do without even getting into anything else. But
that's a series.
Yeah.
We got another Jordan.
Part of it.
Got another Jordan series. Yeah.
So I think that this happens from time to time where you say, well, back in my day, I had Elway, I had Marino, I had all these other great quarterbacks. I'm more of an Elway guy than a Marino guy. And look, I think Dan Marino is the 8th greatest quarterback of the Super Bowl era. That's really good.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're talking about over 50 years of quarterbacking, and he's the highest rated of all the quarterbacks that never won a Super Bowl. Like I go Brady, Montana, Manning, Elway. To me, those are the 4 best of the Super Bowl era. Then I'm going to go, Rodgers, Favre, Mahomes, and Marino. Marino is the only one of the 8 without a Super Bowl title. So to put him even up there is pretty good. I still put him above Steve Young. I think he was phenomenal. But to call him the greatest, no. I mean, he's extremely talented. He had all the tools that you needed, but he couldn't break through.
Well, and I think look, the bigger picture is here. I think you're giving former athletes a little bit too much credit. I think we've seen a flurry of just horrendous current and former athletes' takes on their sport. Most notably in the last few days, I think Kyle Pitts listed his top 4 tight ends of all time, and it was George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Ozzie Newsome, which I feel like he just kind of threw in there to make it not seem that ridiculous. And I can't even remember who the 4th one was, but it wasn't Rob Gronkowski. It wasn't Tony Gonzalez, probably the greatest player in his franchise's history, one of the greatest players in his franchise's history. So the point is, John, just because they played the sport doesn't really make them an expert. And look, we see this on TV all the time. And I'm conflicted because I kind of want these ridiculous takes to stop, but at the same time I'm like, you know what, no, keep them coming, because I want to kill the mystique of the former player opinion, because I feel like it's far too it's given far too much credit. And this is another great example because look, at the end of the day, former players, a lot of them are just fans like a lot of us, especially now if they've been out of the game for years. I mean, we saw actually a pretty cool commercial with some of these guys, older guys, like saying, "Hey, training camp's over," including Brady and Edelman. Just kind of poking me, making me sort of believe that okay, this is never going to happen. This is where my wrestling fandom kind of seeps into real life, but making me kind of feel like they're going to make some grand entrance or whatever. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, a lot of these guys are still fans and will react accordingly. But you can tell when some of these guys have some ulterior motives. And in Montana's case, obviously, he's a guy that for years, a lot of people were like, this guy's the greatest, no doubt about it, blah, 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 blah. But, that title has been passed a long time ago and very emphatically. So, but going back to Dan Marino, and this is something that I'm with you. Like, I think Dan Marino's a great quarterback. I'm not saying otherwise, but the mystique surrounding Dan Marino has ballooned to the point of ridiculousness, John. And what I mean is this mindset that, oh, if he would play today, he would have 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. And I'm like, okay, like give me some reason why you believe that. And if it's solely because of 1984, then I'm gonna poo-poo your answer because, well, that's one season, John. And the reality of it is, if you look beyond 1984, 85, 86, which, look, you can argue is one of the best stretches, 3-year stretches of any quarterback, where he led the league 3 times in yards all 3 years and yards and touchdowns. Incredible, John, no doubt about it. 48 touchdowns, 30 touchdowns, 44 touchdowns. I mean, those are great numbers. But in the subsequent, let's say, let me do some quick math here, 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 seasons, John. 183 games, 106 and 77. Averaged 21 touchdowns and 14 interceptions. Now, 45,000 yards, throwing just under 3,500 a season. Okay, that's not the numbers of it, and they don't tell the whole story. Don't get me wrong here. They do not tell the whole story. I'm not saying they do, but those are not the numbers of someone who would average astronomical numbers that would dwarf everyone else in the league today. So my point is, John, that this idea that his since he's retired 24 years ago, his mystique has just ballooned, over the top. Because, like, again, as great as those first 3 seasons are, the majority of his career, he was pretty much like every other elite quarterback. And I'm not saying he wasn't an elite quarterback, and I'm not saying he would not have had better numbers in this era. Of course he would have. But they'd be right in line with just about every other elite quarterback in this league. So to use that to elevate him to a status that he just doesn't deserve to be in. I mean, look, no disrespect, but he does not deserve to be in the conversation of the greatest quarterback of all time. Sorry.
No, he doesn't have the championship, right? I mean,
no, doesn't have the championships.
All the other guys do. And again, we're not talking about like he played in Johnny Unitas era where, 21 touchdown passes was outstanding. I mean, and I think we see this a lot too, because sometimes athletes, legends grow or they diminish after they retire. And I'm a basketball guy, obviously, so I like to make like cross-sport references. Like Elgin Baylor and Jerry West, I'm going way back, I know. But they were teammates forever. West did win one championship when Baylor retired. But you can say Baylor was better than West was better than Baylor, whatever. But since they both retired, it seems like West legend grew and Elgin Baylor's diminished. Part of it was because Jerry West became one of the greatest executives in the history of sports, and Elgin Baylor wasn't. So that kind of ties it in. I go back to baseball even. In 1950, and again, that's even before Elgin Baylor and Jerry West, but Ty Cobb was voted the greatest player in the first half century of baseball in 1950. The consensus now is it's Babe Ruth, right? Well, here's a little information. Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb never played after 1950, so it's like Ruth's legend grew, Cobb diminished. But again, maybe some of the off-field stuff with Cobb, injured his legend. So this does happen, yeah. So when you look at Marino, those first 3 years, they look like an alien, right? Because back then it was like, holy crap, 48 touchdown passes. Because Dan Peltz was the guy that was putting up really big numbers in the early 80s. He was like, oh my He's thrown 34 touchdown passes, 36 touchdown passes. That's exceptional. Then Marino comes along, does it for 3 years. But like you said, in the next 12, 13 years, still really good numbers, but nothing that would lead you to believe you're going to throw 60 touchdown passes when Patrick Mahomes hasn't done it yet.
Yeah, and look, I mean, and the record still belongs to Peyton Manning, who has 55, and that came in 2013. So, after 1986, and maybe that has something to do with me because I was born in 1986, so maybe I'm a curse upon Dan Marino, and I'm okay with that. I accept that. He crossed the 30 touchdown mark once. And that came in 1994. Ace Ventura days, back when they quote unquote played in a Super Bowl against the Eagles, which I always found funny because at the time, obviously, we know Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl and the Eagles at that point had never won a Super Bowl. So always funny that was the Super Bowl in that movie. Quite a work of fiction. But anyways, once past 30 touchdowns, including that 30 touchdown season, twice reached the 28 touchdown mark. So again, these aren't numbers that sit there and make you say, oh, well, if he played in this era, he would somehow dwarf everyone else. And look, we don't look as great as Patrick Mahomes is, and some of these they don't, their numbers don't dwarf other players. You know what I mean? Like, he's not throwing 15 touchdowns more than the next guy, and this is what most people are suggesting Dan Marino would do. And it's silly because, people take it for like fact. So it's like, okay, Joe Montana's now going to make the backhanded argument that, well, no one had the talent like Marino. And again, this is my problem when people use the word talent, because when they use the word talent, it just means they don't have an argument. Because you're suggesting that another great NFL quarterback, if you're having a discussion about one or the other, doesn't have talent or is lacking talent, which again is just silly and absurd. But anyways, if you look at, and I'm going back to these 11 or 12 seasons, 183 games for Dan Marino. If you compare them, and it's not perfect, again, you have to take into account the rule changes that came between, in the mid 2000s that have obviously progressed since then. So the numbers aren't quite identical, but or completely side by side. But in 8 fewer games, Tom Brady has amassed 44,800 yards, 334 touchdowns, and only 123 interceptions. Whereas Dan Marino, 45,000 yards, 278 touchdowns, 185. He has a lower touchdown percentage, lower higher interception percentage. He got sacked at a lower rate, so he was certainly good at that. But like all these other yards attempt, all these other numbers that were always used against Tom Brady, like, oh, look at his yards per attempt. It means he's a dink and dunk quarterback. Well, his early season numbers were higher than the majority of Dan Marino's career. And some of that time overlapped in terms of era. Like obviously the first handful of seasons for Tom Brady, they were playing essentially in the same era of football that certainly Dan Marino played in the latter half of his career. So again, this myth, this idea, this ridiculous notion that, yeah, Joel's right, it must have been the Isotoner gloves. Maybe he's got a lot of support from them. But, this notion that Dan Marino would somehow be this like godlike quarterback in this era is, well, it's foolish. And it's kind of, it reduces a silly argument, an argument that's already silly. Because if you're trying to make the case against Tom Brady for anyone other than like the founding fathers of football, I'm talking the Otto Grahams of the world, then you really don't have a case. Because at this point, John, I mean, Brady's so far and beyond everyone at this point, you really can't make a legitimate case that's not either heavily influenced by what ifs or hypotheticals. So again, it's foolish, and I always kind of chuckle, and I'm starting to get annoyed with the Dan Marino hero worship.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why all the love for Dan Marino, and I do appreciate
1984. And
Well,
look, I
no,
mean, he's a personality on TV too. I mean, let's be real.
yeah, I mean, he is. He does a lot of charity work. He's a good-looking guy. He was great in college at Pitt. A lot of things, and I do appreciate that. My fellow Paisan Joe Montana and Dan Marino stick together. That's a good thing. But is it because maybe by not winning the Super Bowl, it's actually grown as legends? Like, if that makes any sense, kind of in a backwards way.
Well, it's the same logic that people
Almost
say.
Like Ernie Banks never made the postseason, so
it's the same. It's the same logic of Montana fans saying, "Well, Montana was 4-0 in the Super Bowl." Well, Brady won 7 and went to 10. I don't care that he was 4-0 in the Super Bowl. That doesn't mean anything in this conversation.
Yeah, no, that's to me. I have said it a million times. Brady has 7 gold medals and 3 silvers.
Yeah, exactly.
And Montana has 4 golds and no silvers. No, I mean that's. I don't even know what the discussion is, why it happens, other than if you want to be relevant and talked about, say something like this. Don't come out and say, "Oh no, Tom." If he said Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback ever, no one would talk about it. Now he's bringing up Joe Montana. I mean, Dan Marino. So now everyone's talking about it. So it's just like it's saying kind of. Well, look at. I mean, even Dr. J had his top 10 list, and 8 of the guys I was fine with, but somehow Karl Malone and Tiny Archibald made it, but not LeBron James and Larry Bird. It's like, what's Dr. J thinking? Yeah. Is he, older than we think? And it's just, okay, we're going to talk about it. If you come up with a sensible top 10 list, no one really talks about it, unfortunately.
And it's like, look, look, we understand that these things are subjective, but there's certain things that it's like, you just don't, there are things that are just so obviously not subjective. Like anyone who, like, again, going back to that top 4 tight end list, like, I don't really care. He doesn't have to be number 1. I don't even know if I consider him purely number 1, John. But to not have Rob Gronkowski as one of your 4 top greatest tight ends of all time, that's absurd. Like that, I don't think that's a matter of opinion. I think regardless of era, regardless of whatever, Rob Gronkowski checks every single box that you would want when you're trying to think of the greatest at their particular position. So it's just, to me, it's kind of, some things are just not subjective. And in that case, and at this point right now, it's kind of that way with Tom Brady when it comes to the greatest quarterback of all time. Now, if you want to talk about greatest football player of all time, yeah, there's far more subjectivity. And I don't know if you can come up with a good answer for that one. I'm not going to sit there and dispute someone who says Jerry Rice is the greatest football player or Jim Brown or whatever. Because really, I mean, there is no way to really justify an opinion that's unwaivable. When it comes to the greatest quarterback of all time, like I said, unless you're talking, pre NFL era and the autograms of the world, you really don't have a case for any other quarterback, because whatever their case is, Brady's surpassed them. Oh, stats, Brady's better. Super Bowls, even if you're arguing Brady versus a team, Brady's going to win. So again, the subjective part of that discussion is kind of not there right now. Now, does that mean 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, someone else, maybe it's Patrick Mahomes, maybe Joe Burrow wins 3 Super Bowls in a row starting now? Who knows? I don't know. I can't tell the future. If I did, then, well, it might be kind of boring, John, to know everything.
You wouldn't be talking to me right now. You'd be, at a casino somewhere or just on your phone betting futures, right? But as far as that tight end debate that Kyle Pitts brought up, yeah, of course, Rob Gronkowski is one of the 4 greatest tight ends ever. To me, it's the debate for greatest tight end ever is either Tony Gonzalez or Rob Gronkowski. Gonzalez is almost, in a sense, like the Brady of tight ends, like just sustained greatness for 15 years. Like, the guy never missed a game. His numbers are ridiculous. He never really played with great quarterbacks, so those are the 2 guys for me. Look, Shannon Sharp, who's arguably one of the 5, 6, 7 greatest tight ends ever, says it's Rob Gronkowski. I think he would know more about the position than Kyle Pitts. And just to say this, is I've talked to a lot of former athletes who they get into the media, they get invested, they follow the sport, and then once they're out of it, they don't watch it anymore. Former Patriots who got into the media, we've had them on guests before, and they don't even watch the sport anymore. So they played it. They were really good at it. But once they're out of it, they kind of move on to other things. So for them to start, I even question does Joe Montana even watch football anymore? Like
Yeah.
that might be the case that he doesn't.
Well, and again, I mean, his I think his motivations are more not naivety, but I think he's a little jealous. That's fine. Like,
Sure.
look, there's a reason why these guys are great, because they're competitive and they're never going to accept anything other than perfection. And that's why they were great. But you can kind of hear it in his answer, because he gives that very vague talent qualifier, and he brings up Patrick Mahomes as someone who could potentially pass Dan Marino, and I'm like, well, as what, the most overhyped quarterback of all time? Sure, absolutely. I mean,
he's already surpassed him, to be honest with you. I know it's only 5 years, but I've already put him past Marino.
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, because like if you think about it, he's had more sustained success in his 5 seasons than Marino did in his 14. So that's
Marino only played in 3 AFC Championship games, by the way, 84, 85, and I believe again in like 92. So he only played in 3 AFC Championship games. So and Mahomes already hasn't beaten that.
Right. And here's the thing too, and it's like, I understand, and people always come back with, and this is where kind of Mahomes fans kind of get tripped themselves up, because they also believe this, but if they believe this, then it also means they have to defer to Tom Brady being better. But yes, it's a team sport, no doubt about it. But you cannot convince. I mean, you just cannot make the case that the quarterback doesn't have the greatest impact on wins and losses. And again, it frustrates me when people so like ignorantly sit there and say, "Oh, quarterbacks, wins aren't a quarterback stat." Yes, they are. Yes, they are. That's why every single team needs a quarterback or wants a quarterback. They're always looking for the quarterback, the first round quarterback. Who goes first overall the most? Well, guess what, John? Quarterbacks. You know why? Because quarterbacks are the name of the game. They touch the ball the most. They have the most control, not only on offense, but on defense as well. Because guess what? If you're a bad quarterback and you turn the ball over a lot and you make a lot of mistakes, you're going to put your defense in a very bad position, and they're very likely going to give up more points, therefore making them a worse looking defense. If you're a great quarterback, John, like Tom Brady was for his 21 years, efficient, don't turn the ball over, great ball control, clock control, that type of stuff, guess what? Your defenses are always going to probably be in the bottom or top half of points allowed, like the Patriots. Doesn't mean they were a great defense. They were just really impacted by a great quarterback, and they just had to do enough. And they played with the lead a lot, John. Like, think about it. Like, people give no credence to the fact. And then this is why it's so funny when haters out there, haters, quote unquote, will sit there and say that, oh, Brady was carried by his defense. First of all, that's ignoring the fact that the majority of the seasons that he played in this league, his offense was ranked fairly higher, not only in points, but in yards as well. And again, this is why people only look at points when it comes to the Patriots and Brady's quote unquote defenses, because it's the only metric that gives him that top 10 qualifier, because everything else kind of gives him a middle of the road defense. And that was kind of the way the Patriots played. Bend, don't break. Remember, John? Mm-hmm. How long did we say that about the Patriots defense? And the reason they could do that was they weren't dealing with absurdly a large number of extra possessions. They didn't have to worry about their quarterback turning the ball over 4 times, or the offense playing poor football or making bad decisions and somehow wasting clock, or playing a Philadelphia Eagles offense that was so fast that they ended up hurting themselves because they ran out of energy and their defense was overworked. So, yes. Great quarterbacks have a great impact on wins and losses. And wow, we just got a wild, looks like return on investment alpha. I don't know, some comment on Facebook. It looks like a spam one. It's in Spanish or some other language. I'm not quite sure. But anyways, the point is, it's just quarterbacks are the name of the game. So yes, wins and losses matter. The fact that Dan Marino, again, it's not that he didn't win a Super Bowl, but it's kind of to your point, John, that he only went to 3 AFC Championship games. And if you're going to sit there and try to tell me, it's kind of the same thing, and no offense, I'm sorry I have to do this. It's kind of the same thing with Aaron Rodgers. if you're going to sit there and tell me that he is so supremely talented and gifted and so much better than the next guy, why didn't he win more?
I can't really disagree with that. I've been on that note for several years. He's won it. At least he's gone to 5 and he's 1-4,
Yeah.
which is still better than 0-3. But yeah, no, that's not good. He certainly, I think, in 2 seasons had it set up for him to go on and win the Super Bowl. And if he had done that and played better in the 14 NFC Championship game and the 20 NFC Championship game, now we've got a different conversation. You know, if Aaron Rodgers had 3 Super Bowl wins, now we're talking about him as maybe the 3rd greatest quarterback ever behind Brady and Montana. Maybe he's right on the heels of Joe Montana, you know, because of all the numbers and MVP and all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. No, and Elway's the guy who I think from that era was the greatest quarterback. Well, other than Montana, but Elway at least went to 5 Super Bowls, and in 3 of those, his team was overmatched.
Yeah.
I mean, he was going up against really, you know, incredibly talented teams. I mean, when he played the 49ers after the '89 season, that was a mismatch. Finally, when he got a running game and a decent defense, he won back-to-back Super Bowls in his last few years. He was the guy who he got his team over the hump more often than not compared to Marino. That's why I think he's the greater quarterback. I don't even think that's a discussion. But yeah, no, of course. I mean, the whole debate with Brady, that's like, let's hold off on that for a bit. You know, the guys that are retired certainly aren't going to surpass Tom Brady because they're not playing anymore. Rodgers isn't going to surpass them. The only guy that's playing now that maybe can get into the discussion is, of course, Mahomes, but that's a decade away. You know, let's see it play out.
At minimum.
Right.
Like, and you're talking, you know, and Kyle, I don't know when, I know you jumped in here after we started, but I did bring up Otto Graham a few times, and I've consistently put him in my top 10 great.
And Johnny Unitas, right?
And Johnny,
Unitas.
Him and Johnny Unitas,
yeah.
I've had both in my top 10 list. But yeah, and look, I mean, even with Mahomes, who right now the only active player the active player that's out front, because he, you know, again, you know, Aaron Rodgers isn't going to play long enough to even come close to what Brady did, you know, in his career, obviously at this point, because he's, you know, at his age, he's not going to play another 15 seasons. You know, obviously Patrick Mahomes, we don't know what his career is going to be. Maybe it turns out more like Dan Marino's. Maybe it just, instead of 3 years to start his career, it's 5 years. And then, you know, he has a solid rest of his career. And that's great. That'll get him in, you know, he's already pretty much punched his ticket probably to the Hall of Fame, assuming people don't lose their mind. But that's all well and good. It doesn't nothing for the GOAT conversation. You know what I mean? Like, so like people are already putting him in that conversation. Again, the issue I have is it's just far too premature. And it's there's levels to this that, again, there's many more that have to have to be passed for them to make that a legitimate conversation. And really at this point, again, anyone who's making a case otherwise, in this case Joe Montana, is just it's you're twisting yourself in a pretzel to do so. Because even if you are a hardcore Joe Montana fan, Tom Brady's essentially doubled what he's done. So there's really just no legitimate argument that can be made at this point. So I should, you know, when I title these episodes, I should always, if it's a topic on Brady, I should just leave it at that, because we never get to anything else. Although I think this was a good discussion, and not just about Brady, just in quarterback discussion in general, and Dan Marino specifically, because I think I have an agenda. I don't know if I'm going to become, you know, the anti Dan Marino guy, but I think I'm anti the superhero narrative, because again, it to me, if going back to the big point, if you're going to tell me he's the greatest talent that's ever stepped on the football field and everything like that, then where are the wins? Where are the Super Bowls? Where are the appearances? Where are the opportunities? You know, that's the thing. Like, you make a great point, John. Just where are the opportunities? So, but, and thank you, Joel. I hope that's GOAT in the good terms and not GOAT in the previously. Remember when GOAT used to be bad? They used to be the, I mean, it still is a short for scapegoat, obviously, but it used to be predominantly bad. You say goat now, you're thinking first instinct is greatest of all time. So anyways, that's going to do it for us here today. We'll be back tomorrow, September 1st. Be great. New month, new football season just around the corner. And we're going to wrap up the week and get ready for a brand new week the following week. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will talk to you then.